Welcome to the 27th episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Today we're going to be taking a look at UFC Fight Night Rodriguez versus Waterson. Then after that we're going to take a look at some other news that happened in the UFC recently. And we're going to end by looking forward to UFC 262, which is headlined by Michael Chandler and Charles Oliveira as they are fighting for the UFC Lightweight Championship. But before we get started, make sure to go follow my other social medias. I have Twitter and TikTok. So if you like this podcast, you should like the content over there. Lots of MMA content throughout the week. So it kind of holds you over until another podcast. So, and also before we get started, as you may have noticed, I have a little different of a setup here. I'm back home. I was at my college apartment before. That's where all the old podcasts were at. So for the next couple months here, we're going to be rolling with this setup. And we might see some changes, week to week as I'm kind of ironing out the setup that I will have for, this location. So bear with me through that. But we're still going to be posting every week new podcasts. So I hope you enjoyed those. And let's get started with this week's episode. So, Marina Rodriguez versus Michelle Waterson. This ended up being a pretty entertaining fight. I wasn't too excited for this, and I think that stems from the fact that the original booking for this fight was TJ Dillashaw versus Corey Sandhagen. That was a fight I was so incredibly ready for. I've been asking for that fight since December, I believe, maybe November. After Corey Sandhagen beat Marlon Moraes, I, came on this podcast and I said, hey, make TJ Dillashaw versus Corey Sandhagen. They didn't. They decided to wait. And then Corey knocked out Frankie Edgar, obviously. Everyone remembers that great knockout. And then they were like, all right, let's make this fight. TJ had to pull out of the fight. And, it really put a damper on this fight card for me because it's such a big letdown. They could have put any fight on just about any fight. They could have put a lot of fights here on this headline, and I wouldn't have been excited because it's just such a letdown from Corey Sandhagen versus TJ Dillashaw. And it's as to no fault of Marina Rodriguez or Michelle Waterson, and it ended up being a very entertaining fight. This was, I believe it was fight of the night. If not, it was still very entertaining. They went out there, and Rodriguez was very active. She threw a lot of shots, especially at the end of rounds. I was very impressed by how Rodriguez was able to trap Michelle Waterson in the corners of the octagon. And then when she got her in the corners, she unloaded heavy combos and, was really trying to finish the fight when she had Waterson up against the fence. Waterson is also a very fun fighter to watch because she has such a strong kick game, first of all, and she utilizes her kicks much differently than many other fighters do. So when you combine those two things, this ended up being a great fight to watch. Marina Rodriguez looked very good. She came off her last win over Amanda Hebus, and they gave her a veteran in Michelle Waterson, and she proved again as to why she's one of the best. I don't know if I want to say up-and-comers, but, she is peaking in the rankings in terms of her career. This is the highest she's ever been. So she's starting to put it all together and become a title contender. And this strawweight division is looking really good right now. This fight took place obviously at 125, but it's looking like it's going to affect the rankings at 115. Very short notice, so they probably couldn't make weight. So I'm sure this will affect the rankings at 115. And Marina Rodriguez at 6 has a lot of fun options. The 22nd, we have Yao Xiaonan versus Carla Esparza. So that should give us some answers. And then we have our new champion. So there's another answer that we've kind of talked about over the last couple weeks. I've had some questions is how is this going to turn out, we talked about this a little bit after Mckenzie Dern won. What is next for Mckenzie Dern? Well, she's right in the same conversation as Marina Rodriguez, and you could make that matchup, and I think that's a good matchup to make, Dern versus Rodriguez. They're both up-and-comers, so maybe you don't really want to give two up-and-comers a fight against one another because you don't want to burn that potential of a big-time fight down the road. But right now, if you square off Mckenzie Dern and Marina Rodriguez, it kind of proves a lot of things. Both of these fighters, if they beat one another, they would answer a lot of questions as to whether they are championship material. Because say you're Mckenzie Dern, if you go out there and beat another great striker in Marina Rodriguez, that adds more validity to your case of being a number one contender. If you're Marina Rodriguez, you go in there and you take out probably the best BJJ artist, possibly the best grappler overall in that division. There you are. It's a big-time case for will I fight for a title, So I think Dern versus Rodriguez makes a lot of sense. Beating one another would give them a big step up, and it would kind of show that they deserve some top-tier competition in that 115-pound division, whether that is the winner of Carla Esparza versus Yao Xiaonan, or they may fight for the title next, so that could be something to think of. Whether that is Zhang Wei Li after her loss, whether that is Joanna, who wants a title fight right now, but I'm not sure we're going to get that. So she may be in the market to fight Dern or Rodriguez. But like I said, pairing them up against one another, you have one come out victorious. That really propels them, to the top of this 115-pound division. And I think that would be very beneficial for the UFC and the winner of that fight, obviously. And the loser would still be a top fighter in that division. So, the loser wouldn't be completely out of this. They could easily work their way back because they're both very talented. But as of right now, I think that is the best way to go for both of them. For Waterson, it all depends on when she wants to return. It doesn't look like she did too bad. It doesn't look like she was really beat up too bad. She had some damage, but it wasn't like a Kelvin Kattar where you're like, oh, he needs to take some time off. So for Waterson, I think Nina Nunes would be an interesting matchup, or Amanda Hebus. Maybe Angela. Well, probably not Angela Hill. Angela Hill is probably going to fight a lot sooner. So there's some good options there for Waterson, and there's a lot of unbooked. 7, 8, 9 are all unbooked. 10's unbooked. 11, 12. So there's a lot of ways that we could go here. I guess it all depends. Hebus got COVID, and Angela Hill, their fight got scrapped because of that, so maybe they try and rebook that. But like I said, either way, Waterson still has options. I think Nina Nunes would be a very good fight. Tisha Torres is another good option. So she's not completely out of this either, and she will always be a fun fighter to watch, in my opinion. And then in the co-main, we had Cowboy Cerrone versus Alex Moreno. I almost said Brandon. Cowboy, Moreno went out there and he looked good. First of all, let's give credit where credit is due, because Moreno was able to go in there and get Cowboy out of there. So now this kind of brings up the question of every time Cowboy loses, we sit here and we say, hey, is it time for Cowboy to retire? He either needs to retire or commit to 155, I think. And you can make the case he should retire altogether. I think that 155 is a must if he continues. There are, right now he's a little bit undersized at 170. Moreno looked bigger in there, and he's not necessarily, Morono, and he's not especially a very big 170 pounder. So I think he needs to go down to 155, commit to that. If his next fight's at 155, he'll have a lot better of a chance at winning. So, I think that would be beneficial to the UFC, because you could match Cowboy against a lot of the up-and-comers at 155 and see how they do against Cowboy, and vice versa. You see, hey, does Cowboy still have this left in this? Does he still have fight left in him? And you can get answers to a lot of questions by Cowboy moving down to 155, and I hope that's what we see next from Cowboy. And then possibly one of the more important fights on this card was Neal Magni versus Jeff Neal. Now, I'm surprised they didn't make this the main event, because these are two top-ranked welterweights. So I really thought that they would make this fight, but move it to the main, but they didn't. Maybe, there could have been some issues getting that booked for 5 rounds for one of those guys. That's a possibility. So, Neal Magni versus Jeff Neal. this is very interesting fight here because Neal Magny was able to win this without using much of his grappling. If you were to tell me coming into this that most of the fight would take place on the feet, I would have told you that Neal Magny would have no chance. But, and that's not, I didn't say that as a knock to Neal's striking, but more that Jeff Neal is a tremendous striker, a great power puncher, really good boxing. So Neal did Neal, okay, let me say this. Neal is great at winning fights. He doesn't dominate fights, but he knows how to win a fight, and that's all you need to do. He came out there with a clear strategy. It looks like he kind of took that first round off a little bit and let Neal get tired. And then second round, third round, he really pours it on. Kicks to the body, teeps to the body, lots of jabs, quickness. It doesn't look like he's throwing 100%, really trying to pour it on to Jeff Neal. It looks like he's just trying to touch him. And when you're constantly touching someone, that pace really wears down the opponent. It looks good in the eyes of the judges, and it does a lot to help you win a fight in the end. And that's what it did for Neal Magny. So salute to him for coming in with a great strategy and employing it and going out there and getting a win. So what's next for Neal Magny? This division at 170 is looking really interesting. Because I feel like there's a clear drop-off, and I shouldn't say a drop-off, but you get to a certain point. I would probably say that point is at 10, and then that's Geoff Neal. And then you get to some more guys who aren't as proven as, that top half of the division. And Li Jingliang, Belal Muhammad. They've all have some very impressive wins, but they don't have a win against a top guy. Li's best win is against Ponzinibbio, who was coming off a big layoff. Belal, doesn't have a massive win. Sean Brady doesn't have a massive win. Excuse me. So, very interesting here. Sean Brady, these are all very talented guys, but like I said, they don't have a win that kind of sticks out on the record. And I don't know if they would want to book Neal against one of those guys, but when you look ahead of Neal in the rankings, there isn't a lot of, open names. I don't remember if they got Damian Maia booked. I believe they did. I'll double check on that. But from the rest, it's pretty booked up in the top half of that division. Or if those guys, they've got Neal Magny Damian Maia versus Belal Muhammad. So when you're looking at the top half of this division, I don't know who you put Neal against. Do you put him against Luque? Most people would argue that Luque has earned a guy ahead of him in the rankings. You can't really give him Chiesa. They just had a fight that wasn't too competitive. And then once you don't have a competitive fight with Chiesa very handedly won that fight. It's tough to give him someone ahead of Chiesa in the rankings. So Neal's in a tough spot here. I think he might have to wait this out. And, Khamzat Chimaev might be the answer to this question because they have beef. It's very rare that Neal Magny has beef with an opponent, but he has beef with Khamzat Chimaev. So maybe that's the best way to go. And we might have to wait until Khamzat is back to see both Neal and Khamzat in action. Obviously, we have to wait for Khamzat to be back to see Khamzat, but we may have to wait for his return before we see Neal Magny again. And I think that would be good for Khamzat and Neal. I think that Neal is an opponent where if you beat him, it proves that you can move up in this division. It proves that you deserve to be ranked and you deserve to be highly ranked and you deserve a big-time opponent, similar to what we're seeing out of Chiesa right now. So, and then we also have Geoff Neal. What's next for him? Sorry, sometimes I say Geoff. It's Jeff, but Jeff Neal, I like that. I like a fight between Jeff Neal and Li Jingliang. I think that is very interesting, and the winner of that would kind of, get a springboard in this division, but I think that would be a very fun fight. Neal versus Sean Brady would be a fun fight. There's a lot of fun fights in between that you could, anytime you're booking Jeff Neal, it's probably going to be a fun fight. But matching him up with Li Jingliang or Sean Brady, both very fun fights. So I hope we see one of those. And that would give also, I just said that Li Jingliang and Sean Brady don't have that win that really sticks out in terms of name value. Jeff Neal can add that to their resume if they're able to get a win. So I think that would benefit both guys. And then we have Gregor Gillespie versus Diego Fajeda. Gillespie looked great in this. He was able to break Diego here. And, that's not something that we've really seen that much of in terms of Diego being kind of broken. And very high conditioning, high pace. That'll do that. And I personally was questioning how this would go for Gregor because he has all the talent in the world, but he was out for so long. In his last fight, he lost in brutal fashion after a head kick from Kevin Lee. So, it's kind of interesting as to how he was able to come back and look so good. And I think that what I just said, Gregor Gillespie mirrored a lot of those doubts in his post-fight presser. So much respect to Gillespie for coming out there and getting a big-time win, and he looked really, really good. And, he was able to finish Diego. And I know finishes aren't everything, but if you look at Benil Daryush, he was not able to finish Diego. Excuse me. He was not able to finish Diego, so that's something to keep in mind that Gregor was able to go out there and finish and, go out there, and he looked very good. So I'm interested to see what's next for for Gregor. I think Islam would be a fun fight. Now the lightweight division is so hard to book. Well, it's hard and easy to look at fights for the lightweights because there's so many guys that are booked right now, so it's hard to book. But at the same time, you could have anyone fight anyone, and it's probably a fun fight. But Gregor's got to move up in the rankings. I don't really want to see that Kevin Lee rematch. He beat Diego Fajeda, so he's going to move up to he's probably going to move up to 12 or 13. And, once you get to 11, you have Islam. That'd be a really fun fight if they can both agree to that. Paul Felder, when is he going to return? Paul doesn't fight that frequently, so I don't even like throwing names out for Paul Felder. I think if Benil Daryush loses to Tony Ferguson, I think that would be a really interesting fight. If Benil wins, that'd be a different story because you got to move Benil way up. He's got to be fighting in the top 5 if he beats Tony. If Tony loses, that might be a fun fight as well. Or, maybe RDA. That might be a little bit of a stretch, maybe. I guess it all depends on who Islam fights because you might have Islam versus RDA. That takes away 2 good bookings. But if Benil Daryush loses, that would probably be the fight that I would want to see the most because I think, those are 2 guys who would be close in the rankings recently fighting at the same time. So I think that would be a really interesting matchup. And for Fajeda, he's probably going to have to do the dirty work. If you're in that, 12, 13, 14, 15 range and you lose, and Diego's lost at least 2 in a row. 2 in a row. He's going to have to do the dirty work. And what I mean by that is he's probably going to have to fight one of these top up-and-coming 155-pounders, and that's not going to be fun. That's not going to be fun at all because those guys, Rafael Fazid, Brad Riddell, Armin, there's so many really good fighters here that aren't ranked at 155, and he's going to have to be the guy to take on one of them, it looks like. So doesn't look like Diego's got an easy day of work coming for him. Then let's skip ahead to some other news in the UFC. We'll go to other news. Most of this other news is involved with UFC 262 in some way. So it's really it's really gonna mesh together here. But I look forward to UFC 262 and some other news, so it's kind of gonna come together. But the one piece that kind of isn't so involved with UFC 262 is TJ Dillashaw cornered Juan Archuleta, and he, there was a picture going around of his cut and, well, I should say lack thereof a cut, because he was supposed to fight Corey Sandhagen on Saturday, and his cut on his eyebrow kind of forced that to be canceled. Now, the thing about this is whether he has a cut now, that doesn't really make a difference as to whether he can fight or not, because when the injury originally happened, you have to cancel the fight. And I'm a big Corey Sandhagen fan, so this isn't like coming from a biased point towards TJ Dillashaw. If anything, I'm not the biggest TJ Dillashaw fan, so this would be the complete opposite of that. But with that being said, when you have a cut like that, you have to cancel the fight because you don't know how that's going to heal in a 2-week period, and you can't really expect him to be ready to fight. And it could burst open really easily in the fight. And I think it's better to have this fight canceled and rescheduled than it is to have this fight, happen and then have, the cut burst open and have it kind of, end via a cut. I think that would be worse. But, I don't think this is something that TJ was running from, because he was very clearly had a massive cut on his eye. And I think at that point, that's when doctors and UFC officials have to step in and say, hey, we have to cancel this fight, because you can't risk having it fall through, later. This fell through about 2 or 3 weeks out. But if they, try and keep this, fight on the card, and then this cut doesn't heal, and now we're pulling it, a week out or 3 days out, it's going to be a lot harder to get that replacement fight. So that's why that happened. Not fortunate, but I just wanted to address that quickly because I saw a lot of people talking about that, and it didn't really, make sense to me as to why that was such a big deal, because, it just doesn't make much sense to me. And then UFC 262 has really taken a hit. This piece of news is a little bit older because I didn't talk about it last week because I didn't film last week because I was moving on Sunday. So, but Nate Diaz versus Leon Edwards was called off UFC 262. It has been moved to UFC 263. This does two things, two very obvious things. It makes UFC 262 a lot worse in terms of card quality, and it makes 263 a lot better. UFC 263 is quietly becoming a great card. It started off as, it started off with UFC 263 being kind of a weaker card because you had Figueiredo versus Moreno, and then Damian Maia versus Bilal Muhammad, Paul Craig versus Jamal Hill. All very fun fights that I'm interested to see. But when you add Israel Adesanya versus Marvin Vettori as the main event, and when you add Leon Edwards versus Nate Diaz as the third fight down on the card, being a 5-round, non-co-main event, non-title fight, this card is looking very good. Very, very good. So it has slowly improved to being a top-tier card. So I'm excited for that. But, I think what this tells me is that Nate Diaz is taking this fight very serious, because I don't think Nate Diaz pulls out of a fight if he's not taking it very serious and if this injury isn't something that could, prevent him from winning. I think he's taking this fight very seriously, and he wants to go out and make a statement, and I think him pulling out of this fight proves that. So, I'd rather see someone pull out of a fight than go in there and fight injured. Because, if Nate Diaz goes in there with this back problem and, loses, then, he's got an easy out saying, it was the back. If you pull out of a fight with an injury and then lose the rescheduled fight, there's a lot less that, and I'm not saying Diaz would make excuses. I'm kind of bringing this, more of a general statement because some fighters would make that excuse. So I think it's better to pull out than go in there, fight injured, than use it as an excuse when you lose. And, all the fans of that fighter would also use that excuse. So you'd be seeing it for years on Twitter and social media. And I think it just solves a lot of problems. fight healthy, don't fight injured. And then, we're going to see more fights with a more realistic outcome. So I'm glad that happened. I shouldn't say I'm glad that happened, but I'm glad that, an injury happened and we took the proper kind of action to make sure everything's good here in the future. And then Shabazian versus Hermanson was also moved to May 22nd. This happened right before I started recording, so I don't really have too many details on that. So that's unfortunate, but it did happen. And once again, this card took another hit. UFC 262 did. But now that we've discussed that, I'm going to give my thoughts here on this card. Okay. I have, in the main event, we have Michael Chandler versus Charles Oliveira. I'm leaning Michael Chandler in this. I think that Michael Chandler is the better striker here. And I think that's going to be important because in my opinion, it's going to be tough to see Charles Oliveira taking down Michael Chandler because he has such strong wrestling. But, Oliveira was able to take down Kevin Lee, and he was able to take down Tony Ferguson. So I think that Michael Chandler sees that, and he's going to be more aware that, Oliveira has that takedown ability. It's not that the ability isn't there, but that ability is no longer hidden. It's no longer a secret. He went out there and took down two great wrestlers. And now that Chandler has seen that, I think he's going to be prepared for that, and he's going to have his wrestling ready. And if Chandler's defensive wrestling is ready, this fight's going to take place mostly on the feet. And when this takes place on the feet, I go Chandler just because he's so powerful on the feet. And, with that build, throwing leg kicks, working shots to the body and head like he did against Dan Hooker, I think Chandler's a very tough person to beat. And he's one of the more well-rounded fighters in the UFC. And I think after that fight, we will see more people saying that Chandler is one of the more well-rounded fighters in the UFC. So I'm going Chandler in that. I could see knockout and I could see decision. I don't think he'd get a submission win unless it's like a, knock him out on the feet, he falls down, grab a rear naked choke, get him to tap type deal. But I could see knockout. I could see decision. I think he's going to have control of this fight, and whether he can land the shot to put it away or not, we'll have to wait and see, but I will think he will be in control of this fight. Then, the co-main, Tony Ferguson versus Benil Daryush. This is a very tough one to call for me. I'm a big Tony Ferguson fan. I'm here wearing the Grand Valley shirt. That's where I go to school. Tony Ferguson went to Grand Valley. So I'm a big Tony Ferguson fan. And in this one, my head says it's going to be Benil Daryush because he's on such a hot streak and he is the younger fighter and he's kind of in his prime. Well, it looks like Tony's coming out of his prime, but my heart says Tony. I don't think I ever picked Tony to lose a fight, and I'm going Tony in this one just because I think we have seen changes in his preparation since his loss to Oliveira. He has been more open to coaching, and he's been more aware that, hey, I wasn't well-rounded enough. A lot of the issues we saw from Tony, we saw him say those were issues. So if he can recognize those issues, I'm thinking that Tony will be able to fix those issues. A lot of times fixing the issue is easier than recognizing it, and since he recognized it, I think he can take care of them. So I'm going Tony. I don't know if we'll see prime Tony, but I think we'll see a better Tony. And I think a better Tony can beat Benil Daryush. But I do think this is going to be close because both guys, have a lot on the line in this one. Who knows what's next for Tony if he loses. If Benil, wins, he's, kind of got a lot of hype around his name after beating Tony. So I really think both guys have a lot on the line, and I think we're going to see a tough, potential fight of the night right here. And then another fight that's potential fight of the night, Shane Burgos versus Edson Barbosa. These two are going to go to war. Who's going to win? Toss up for me. Toss up. Flip a coin. Edson has looked really good in his last couple fights. Shane Burgos has, always been a tough guy to beat. And though people who have beat him have, really had to put in the work to do it. I think the last person to beat Shane was Cater, and they had a really close fight going up. Oh, Josh Emmett. Yeah, Josh Emmett versus Shane Burgos was fight of the night that night. He beat Makwan, and he beat Cub Swanson. So then his last loss before that was to Calvin Cater. Yeah, I think this is, like I said, this is going to be a close one, toss-up, but I lean Barbosa. That's where I'm leaning, but I'm not confident in that because I'm more confident that this will be an absolute war than I am in picking a winner. And then women's flyweight, Caitlin Chukagian versus Viviane Arjuno. So I'm leaning Arjuno, and she looked very good in her last fight. But Chukagian is no slouch. A lot on the line in this one. That's the nice thing about these fights is there's a lot on the line for all these guys on this main card. We still don't know which fight is going to replace Hermanson and Shabazian on the main card, but the other four have a lot on the line. Arjuno has her chance to prove that she's a top fighter in this 125-pound division and that she is a title contender, and she's not just a prospect. And Chukagian has to prove once again that she's, still one of the top fighters in this division. But with that being said, I lean Arjuno. I was very impressed with her last fight. Chukagian has also looked good as of late, but I am leaning towards Arjuno. It might be the fact that I was more impressed by her last performance and less from a strategic standpoint as to why I'm picking Arjuno. But she did look good in her last fight, so I am riding with her for the rest of this one. And then the prelims of UFC 262. I think we had a couple fun fights on here, but nothing major, if I remember correctly. I haven't looked at them in a minute here. And okay, we have Jacare versus Andre Muniz, Lando Venata versus Mike Grundy, Andrea Lee versus Antonita Shevchenko. Those are all some fun fights, and I like those. We have Matt Schnell versus Rodrigo Botonian, Jordan Wright versus Jamie Pickett. I like a lot of these fights. These are some fun fights on the prelims. I'll be watching these. And I watch most of the prelims, so I guess that's not a new statement. But some very fun fights here. I'm not going to go through and do a breakdown on all these. I imagine that what the UFC should do is move up Schnell versus Bonatrin. Can't say his last name. But they should move that up to the main card. Let's get some more eyes on these guys at 125 pounds. And I think, or maybe Andrea Lee versus Shevchenko. I think one of those two should get bumped to the main card. Keep Jacare as the headline of the prelims. So, that's my thoughts on who should move up. Not too much to talk about this week. Kind of a shorter episode. I mean, I'm not going to drag out here and talk about some stuff that, isn't very interesting. So we only got 30 minutes. We're going to cut it at 30 minutes. Before we end this, I'm sorry. Very nasally today. Allergies are bad. Might not sound the best. My apologies for that. But thank you through the allergies, through the new setup. If you watched this whole thing, thank you very much. And thank you for watching the 27th episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Join me next week when we break down the aftermath of UFC 262.